All right, so let's record the second part, the second section in the first chapter of chapter 1, and hopefully our Bluetooth is going to work better in this video than it did in the last video for screen sharing. Okay, so we are going to talk about levels of organization in section 2 of chapter 1. And so all y'all had to take a 4-hour science before you got to AP1. So hopefully you took Bio 1010, or maybe you took chemistry, but hopefully you've covered these already and this is just a repeat. But if not, let's go through them one more time so you know what we're talking about when we talk about levels and structural organization. Okay, the levels. In this book, we're going to lump all the chemical into the chemical level. In Majors Bio, they may break that down into elements, and then they may break it down into molecules and macromolecules. But we're just going to summarize those guys. Atoms, subatomic particles. When two atoms come together and they bind together and they make a molecule, we're going to lump all of those guys. Macromolecules, all that stuff is in the chemical level, and we're going to consider that the smallest level of organization on the level of organization charts. So that's the chemical level. Molecules of water, molecules of oxygen bound together, glucose, those macros that we need, proteins, fats, lipids, all that stuff, chemical level. Let's go up another level. Okay, so now we're going to go from chemical level to, we jump ahead of organelles, and we're going to go to the next level. And this textbook considers it cells. So the whole cell itself, that's going to be level number 2, according to this diagram over here. So we've got chemical, here's our chemical level, chemical, and then this is cellular level. So here's our cellular level on our little pyramid chart in this textbook. Cellular level is where it's at, as far as this is the smallest level where life begins. The cell is the smallest structure that holds all the properties of life. And we're going to talk about the properties of life in the next section, but it can grow, it can reproduce. If something is alive, it can sense its environment. It is able to react to its environment. All of these are properties of life. We're going to go through them in just a little bit. In the next video, this is the cellular level. So it is the smallest level that has all the properties of life. Is it the smallest level on the organization chart? No, and don't be tricked, because that's the chemical level with the molecules. But a molecule of water is not alive. A bacteria cell is alive. E. coli, you betcha, is alive. But that molecule of glucose, not alive. So chemical level is the smallest level, not alive, doesn't have the properties of life. Cellular level is the smallest level that contains all the properties of life, that something's alive in. All right, so let's go up again on our organizational level. So we're going to take different cells together and we're going to put them in a group, and that group of cells that are different types may be considered a tissue. So I mentioned this before in the previous video. We had different tissue types, and we were talking about gross and microscopic anatomy. And in the microscopic anatomy, we talked about the cardiovascular, and we talked about the heart, the cardiovascular system. And within the cardiovascular system, one of those parts of it is blood. Blood is a type of tissue. It's called a liquid connective tissue, and blood has red blood cells, and it has white blood cells, and it has chunks of whole cells called platelets. And all of these are different cell types, right? But they make up this tissue, and the tissue is a collection of different types of cells. So now we've gone from cell to tissue, and let's go up. So now we're going to have different tissue types. So we're going to have epithelial tissue. We're going to have myocardium, the cardiac muscle tissue. And then we are going to have our cardiac outer layer of tissue, the pericardium, that's going to be the sac around the heart. We're going to have all these different layers of tissue, and together they make the heart, and the heart is an organ. So we've gone up from chemical to cellular to tissues. Different tissues come together and they can make an organ, and then we may put different things together and form a system. So in this case, the example in this picture here is a bladder, and a bladder is going to have epithelial tissue. It's going to have smooth muscle instead of cardiac muscle on the inside. The smooth muscle that when it gets stretched out, it's going to contract down, and that's what your body knows that you have to go to the bathroom, is that smooth muscle that's lining the bladder. So you've got lots of different tissue on the bladder. And if we put the bladder together with, say, the kidneys and the ureters and the urethra, then we've come up with a whole organ system, whole system. So we're going to talk about the different systems in this section right here in chapter 1. So chemical, then come up to the cell, smallest level that has all the properties of life, by the way, don't forget it. Then we're going to go up to tissue. Then from tissues, different tissues come together and we make an organ, whether that's a bladder or a kidney or a heart. It'll make an organ. Then different parts of things will come together. The heart is going to come together with the liquid connective tissue of the blood that is going to be combined with the vasculature of the arteries and the veins and the capillaries. All of that is the cardiovascular system. Or in this case, we have the kidneys and the ureters and the bladder and the urethra, and that's going to be part of the excretory system right here. If we have multiple organ systems working together, those come together and we form a whole organism, me and you. So me and you, we're made out of multiple organ systems that we're going to go through, and you're going to need to know them, at least the basics of each of the systems, what their main job is what I want you to get out of chapter 1. And so we're going to talk about the 11 systems. So these are organization levels as they stand in our book, in this textbook. If we were going into majors bio or 1010, we'd go even higher, from organism to, from an organism to a population of organisms, to a community, to an ecosystem, to a biosphere. We go all the way up to the whole planet Earth as a biosphere. But in this textbook, we're just functioning on the body. We're just focused on the levels and structure of anatomy and physiology. So these are our levels here: chemical, cellular, tissue, organ system, and organism, B and U. So we've got 6 levels of organization in this textbook that I want y'all to know and love and know the difference of. Know who's the biggest to smallest. I'm definitely going to ask you that on the lecture quiz. It's probably going to be on the test somewhere too. Know what the smallest levels are compared to the biggest levels. Be able to put them in order. I may ask biggest to smallest. I may ask smallest to biggest. It just depends. So know the organization levels. I always ask about them. Okay, skipping past it. We talked about cells. They were the smallest units of life. We're going to talk about properties of life in a little bit. Cells, we need to know about for cell theory. So cell theory, what are we talking about with cell theory? You're going to need to know cell theory, and we'll talk about it again in future chapters, but that cells are going to be the building blocks of all multicellular organisms, plants, animals, those kind of guys. Are there animals that are unicellular? Yes, of course. Bacteria, archaea are unicellular organisms. They do all the properties of life, but they can also be building blocks for multicellular animals. So they are structural building blocks. They are produced by the divisions of pre-existing cells. You are not just going to be able to magic a cell out of thin air. It doesn't happen that way. You get one cell from an existing cell, and that cell undergoes cell reproduction, whether it's binary fission or maybe it's mitosis, but you're not just going to have a cell appear out of nothing. You had to have a pre-existing cell before this new cell appeared. We won't talk about the existence of all life and where all life came from, because that is a topic for another class. But in this class, you have to have a cell to get another cell like that one. And then these guys are the smallest structure of life when we talk about the organization levels that performs all the vital functions, which we're going to get into in a little bit. So this is cell theory. Know these 3 parts to cell theory. There's always a question about cell theory on the first exam. Know cell theory. If you have questions about cell theory and it's not making sense to you, again, reach out, shoot me an email, we'll go over it. Tissues are groups of cells, different types of cells, and there are 4 tissue types. We're going to have a whole chapter on histology, and you're going to need to know all the different tissue types and what categories they fall into. But let's talk about, in general, just the 4 types. Let's go over the 4 types. So some of the easiest ones is going to be muscle. Muscle tissue is its own type. And out of the muscle tissue, it's one of the easiest because there's only 3 types of muscle tissue. So we know, muscles are going to help us move around. They're going to control entry and exit out of things. Oh, excuse me. They're going to power the heart if we're talking about cardiac muscle. They're going to move food through our GI tract if we're talking about smooth muscle. Help us go to the bathroom if we're talking about smooth muscle. So there's 3 different types of muscle tissue. There's cardiac, smooth, and skeletal, and they are all lumped together in muscle group in tissue types in histology. So that is one category of muscle tissue. It's its own connective group of tissue. And then let's go into another tissue type that's relatively simple and we can knock it out pretty fast. It is nervous tissue, and nervous tissue is just like it sounds, your neurons, the cells that are communicating signals, from your brain to the rest of your body, communicating signals of information that I am taking things in through my eyes, the receptors in my eyes, and they're going to send that information up to my brain so I can process that and then send that information out. So all of those communication cells, neurons, and the neuroglia, the helper cells that help those neurons live your whole life and stay that way successfully, all of that is lumped into nervous tissue, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system. All that is a second category called nervous. So we've talked about muscle as a tissue type, nervous is a tissue type, and now let's get into 2 categories that are epi and connective. We're going to get into way more detail on this stuff later when we get into the histology chapter, but epithelial tissue, what I want you to know now and carry with you into the next lecture when we talk about epithelial tissue lines things. They are going to be the outside liner, whether that is physically outside of your body, like your skin, is protecting the outside of yourself. Or if I am swallowing down maybe I've got some hot chocolate because I felt like having hot chocolate, or maybe I heated up some food and it was really hot, and so I swallowed it down. The liner in my GI tract, that is also epithelial. So it doesn't have to be physically outside. It can be inside. If you think of your body and your GI tract, it's like a giant donut with a hole that goes all the way through your body. That hole is called the lumen, and a lumen is lined with epithelial. So whether it's lining your GI tract as you swallow your food down, your blood vessels on the inside, epi is a category of tissue that lines and protects stuff. Epi is always on the outside. What's underneath epi could be connective. So this is the first one we talk about. This is our second one we talk about. This is the group number 3. We just finished epi, lining tissue. They're layers. They're going to be on the outside of whatever it is. It's going to be our lining tissue. Connective tissue is underneath an epi. You're not going to get connective tissue exposed out there. It shouldn't be. If it's exposed out there, something's wrong. Connective tissue should be hiding under a layer of epithelial tissue somewhere. And connective tissue, I categorize connective as really like a junk drawer. If you have a junk drawer in your house where where your car keys go and pens and pencils and all that stuff just kind of accumulates in that one random drawer of stuff. I feel like that's what the connective tissue category is, because you've got liquid connective tissue and you've got solid connective tissue like bone, and you've got fat in this group. It's a whole bunch of different things combined together as connective tissue. So that's the 4 tissue types. There are 4 types. Those are tissues. We're going to have a whole chapter on it. Let's move on. Our organ systems. Need to know these. I want you to know what the different names of the systems are. And we have them all here in this one giant picture. Well, not all of them. These are some of them, most of them, but not all of them, for the different organ systems. What I want you to know, I've got tables in here that I've stolen out of OpenStax and Pearson and made my own tables to give you this information, but I need you to know what the major function is of every system. If I asked you what the major function is of the digestive system, what would you tell me? Well, it's to break down your food, right? I need you to know for all these systems, what's its major function and what are some organs that you're going to find in here. If I listed off that this system's job is to break down food, and some of the organs involved in this system involve the intestines and the stomach And there's other accessory organs like the liver and the pancreas and blah, blah. If you heard stomach and breaking down food, you should know that I'm talking about the digestive tract. If I mentioned lungs and exchanging gases, I'm talking about respiratory system. So this table here is telling you the major functions of every system that we're going to need to know. You know, exchanging gases is at the lungs. Transportation is the cardio system. Getting rid of waste is the excretory system. Bringing in food and breaking it down and get the nutrition, digestive system. So please know all the major functions of the systems. You do need to know that for chapter 1. I have broken all the systems down and made their own PowerPoint slides for each one. Integumentary system, integument, I want you to think of the outside of your body, your skin, your hair, your nails. That's integumentary system. Those are major parts of integumentary system. And what's the job of the integumentary system? It's to protect you. It's to protect you and keep what's inside inside and what's outside outside. That's integumentary system, and it's going to protect you. It's also going to help control and regulate body temp. What happens if you get hot? Blood rushes up to your face, cools you down. You can sweat and that water will evaporate off, and that also cools you down. If you get cold, we're going to pull the blood away from those tissues and try and put it in the core where you're needed the most in your vital organs. So integumentary system is one. Skeletal system, what's its job? Support your body, give you structure. So support, it's going to protect tissues. What goes around your brain, you got a nice bony protector right here. About your important organs in your thoracic cavity, you got your ribs protecting them. So it's going to protect important tissues. It also stores minerals. We'll get into that in the next chapters down the road when we talk about bones. They are going to be great mineral storage for your body, like calcium. And they also form your blood cells. When we're talking about white blood cells and red blood cells, where do they all come from? Where do they all get made? Where do they all start out at? In your bone marrow. That's why it's so important. So know the major components of the system. What's the function of the system? Muscular system. We can't get around. I can't do this movement right here without muscles. Muscles are super important. They're going to help you move. They are going to provide support. I'm going to work on my posture while I'm making this video. They are going to provide support. They are going to control access into and out of things. If I had my lips closed, nothing's going to get through there. We will talk about all of these sphincters in the GI tract. There's like 5 of them that control movement through the GI tract and let things in and keep things out. And also, what happens when you get really cold? We talk about what happens when you get really hot, right? But what happens when you get cold? What do? You start to shake, you shiver, the muscles contract. And what that does is release heat when you shiver. If you are so cold, you stop shivering, that's a real bad problem. So, muscular system, respiratory system, major components, all these guys, big giveaway, lungs, but we've got all the other components of the respiratory system. That's going to be AP2, we'll go into respiratory system. Its main job is to bring in the gases for gas exchange. So we need to bring in the fresh air with the oxygen. We need to get rid of the CO2 that is accumulating all throughout your body that your bloodstream has transported to the lungs, and now your lungs can finally get rid of it, get rid of the CO2 that is accumulating. So gas exchange is the main job of the lungs. So bringing in the air and getting rid of the old waste of the air, like CO2 that we need to get rid of. We got to get rid of that. And also producing sound, being able to talk to you is also respiratory system, and smelling. Hopefully you're smelling something good where you're at. Respiratory. What about nervous? The job of nervous. We mentioned this before. Communication. So performing responses to stimuli, being able to detect it, bring it in, process it, and send out an output. We are going to talk about nervous system at the tail end of this semester. We have CNS, central nervous system, and there's PNS, peripheral nervous system. CNS, brain, spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is everything that comes off of that. And we're going to go into that again later in the semester. Right now, I need you to know major job is communication, responding to stimuli, being able to process that, that nervous system. Cardio, we talked about, its main job is transportation. So the heart's job is to pump, pump, pump the blood. The blood's job is to transport things around, whether that is gases, bringing in oxygen for the cells that need it, getting rid of the CO2 that is accumulated in the cells from cellular respiration, bringing in the glucose, transporting that because we just ate dinner and our body is breaking down the nutrition, and we need to get that to the cells and get all those vitamins to the cells that need them. So that's job of transportation, circulatory system. So transportation, heart, blood, vessels, and the blood itself. Lymphatic and immune system is one that we will talk more about in AP2, not so much in AP1, but when you think of the cardio system, its job is to transport and get things out there to all of the places in the body. And part of cardio system that we talk about is pressure. That there's going to be pressure pumping out of the blood vessels and into the tissues next to the blood vessels. And then we will have colloidal osmotic pressure that pulls stuff back in. So sometimes that fluid gets pushed out and it accumulates. And if anybody's ever had anything that swells, I have allergies, so I wake up every morning and like my eyelids are all puffy and swollen because I have pets that I love dearly, but I'm allergic to them. So I swell up, and that fluid that accumulates, you know who gets rid of that fluid? It's your lymphatic system. Ooh, there's a storm going on right now outside my window. Lymphatic system gets rid of the fluid, but I don't want to just take that fluid that's accumulating out there in my body and just dump it back into my cardio system. I want to make sure that that fluid is clean. So lymphatic system is to take the fluid away, and then our immune system is to clean up that stuff and make sure that what I'm dumping back into my subclavians is going to be clean processed fluid. So we need to drain the excess fluid and clean it up. So our lymph nodes that are filled with white blood cells, T's and B cells, are going to clean up that fluid and make sure that everything is good before we dump it back in the bloodstream. So defend against infections and diseases and returns fluid back to the bloodstream. So that's going to include, again, the lymph nodes, our lymphatic vessels, pretty much everywhere the blood vessels go, arteries, veins, capillaries, you're going to have lymphatic vessels that match along to them. There are rare exceptions, and we'll talk about them in AP2, but in general, where the blood flow goes, the lymphatic system also goes, and they work hand in hand. Moving on, endocrine. When you hear the word endocrine, I want you to immediately think of hormones. Hormones, hormones, hormones. The endocrine system is going to release chemicals in the body. Those chemicals that come from an endocrine gland is going to be called a hormone, and it will travel throughout your body, and it will produce different things depending on where the receptors are and what the hormone is. So hormones could be anything. They could be sex hormones. It could be testosterone. It could be estrogen. It could be hormones having to do with your sodium intake, aldosterone. It could be hormones helping you with water, ADH. There's a ton of hormones out there that you will learn about in AP2. And those are coming from endocrine glands, and that is your endocrine system. There are a number of places in the body that produce those chemicals that we call hormones, and some of those are in your brain, your hypothalamus. We'll learn about that structure in this class. We're going to learn about pituitary gland and where that is found. All of these are found up near your brain in this class. Pineal gland, also near the brain. Thyroid gland, down below. Here's your thyroid over here. Your hypothalamus, we're going to learn all this. I'll talk about the rooster and the beak and where things are. But we've got thalamus is this guy. Hypothalamus is below about here. Pituitary gland is this little dangly bit. If you have not had me before in a class, I always refer to things in analogies of food because I am always thinking about food all the time, 24/7. So the pituitary gland to me looks like a jelly bean dangling down off of the brain. And it's responsible for a lot of hormones that you'll learn about in AP2. So there's pituitary gland right here. It's this guy. And then we got the pineal gland. And if you enjoy sleep, as restful, joyous sleep that you can get, that's pineal gland. That's going to help you with your melatonin that gets released. So that's there. Thyroid gland is this guy right here. When we go into respiratory and AP2, we'll talk about the thyroid. There's a gland on top, thyroid gland. Gland is parathyroid gland, and it is on the back side of the thyroid gland. They look like little buttons back there. There is the adrenal gland. It sits on top of the kidneys. It's these guys right here are the adrenals, your fight or flight. Fight or flight, when we talk about parasympathetic and sympathetic later in the semester, that's your fight or flight coming from the adrenal gland. Pancreas has both endocrine, which are hormones, and exocrine. We're going to talk about chemicals that get released to the outside of your body. That is your pancreas. Pancreas is super duper important for a number of reasons. So it's included in both endocrine and exocrine secretions. And then again, we mentioned hormones like sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. Those are going to be produced by the gonads, the testes, and the ovaries. So those, all of these, if I mentioned any of these things, if I mentioned gonads, if I mentioned pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary, those are all structures that are part of the endocrine system, and it is going to direct long-term change in other organ systems. That's its job. Urinary system eliminates waste. Urinary system is going to eliminate the excess, whatever it is, excess water, excess salt. A lot of us are eating processed foods. I know you got to do what you got to do, and some of us, if the option is no dinner or stopping at McDonald's, I'm stopping at McDonald's, right? So some of us are getting a lot of processed foods, and a lot of that has salts. So we got to get rid of that. Urinary system is going to do that for us. Any of the other waste that is accumulating and building up, our nitrogenous wastes, we got to get rid of that stuff. We're going to turn it into urea, and we're going to get rid of it. We'll talk about more of urinary system in AP2, but I do need you to know major components, which we mentioned before. Talked about the bladder. The kidneys are where it's at as far as filtration. You have 2 of them. They're super important. You are filtering your whole body's blood content in about 5 minutes. So kidneys, they're going to be connecting the kidneys to the bladder. It's going to be the ureters. Bladder is going to be your storage compartment for the urine and the waste that you're producing. And then when you get to a place where you can actually go to the bathroom and relieve yourself, it's going to leave the body via the urethra. Urinary system, job is to get rid of excess waste. We talked about digestive system. Its job is to break down the food and be able to have it absorbed in the body. So processing food and absorbing those nutrients. It is your whole GI tract, also called the alimentary canal. We'll talk more about this in AP2. It's going to be your mouth, your oral cavity, salivary glands, your parotid, that if you've ever seen pictures of somebody with the mumps, if you get your MMR vaccine, one of the M's is mumps, measles and rubella. Parotid glands, submandibular, and why am I blanking on it? Parotid, submandibular, sublingual, right? No, it'll come to me. Salivary glands are going to release secretions to help you break down your food in your mouth. And then we got swallow down. You're going to have your pharynx that runs totally behind the nose, behind the mouth, and lands down into your larynx voice box is where it's going to stop. So that's the end of the pharynx. Esophagus. Ooh, I don't know if y'all heard that thunder on my video. And it's getting kind of scary. Esophagus, stomach. Leaving the stomach goes to the small intestines. Small intestines, we're going to have 3 different parts of the small intestines that you're going to need to know in AP2. Then we have accessory organs that help us with secretions and things that are going to help break down the food. So accessory organs to break down stuff is the liver. The liver is going to form, liver does lots of stuff. Liver does lots of stuff. It helps with toxins. It helps recycle blood cells. It's going to help produce bile that helps break down salts and fats. It's going to help break down fats. So we've got the liver. We got the gallbladder that's going to store that bile, and the bile is kind of a greenish color. So it's always green. You always see the gallbladder is green in our model pictures. Then we got the pancreas. I told y'all was responsible for endocrine hormones such as insulin and glucagon. Those are endocrine, those are hormones. But it also produces a whole bunch of exocrine things. So we're going to have pancreatic amylase, and why am I blanking on all of the different secretions, all the trypsin and chymotrypsin and all of these secretions that we get produced in the GI tract from the pancreas. That's going to help break down a whole bunch of different stuff. And then the large intestine, which is going to have sections of the colon that will go down, and eventually it's going to leave via the anus out of your body. GI tract, digestive system, more about this on AP2. Major function, processing food and absorbing the nutrients. Know the different parts. Reproductive system, what's the whole purpose? Okay, biologically speaking, passing on your genes is the whole purpose. That is your life goal in biology. It may not be your personal life goal, but biologically speaking, if you are successful, you have passed on your genes. If you are not successful, you didn't pass on your genes. So the whole job of the reproductive system is to produce gametes, to produce your sex cells. So produce the eggs, produce the sperm, make those sex cells. It's also going to be responsible for the hormones involved in the system. We will talk more about that in AP2 and reproduction and the hormones and what spikes when. And then you've got to pass on your genes, right? But what do we do once the sperm and the egg finally meet? We need to be able to develop that embryo into an organism that is able to carry on itself without us. So we got to grow baby. So that is job of reproductive system, to produce the sex cells, produce the hormones, and support the development of the baby from fertilization to birth. Female reproductive parts. We are going to have ovaries that make the eggs, uterine tubes, also called fallopian tubes, that lead to the egg to the uterus. Somewhere along the way, if it gets fertilized, that little baby embryo is going to implant at the uterus, aka the baby maker, the oven, to cook baby for the next 9 months. Then baby will be, depending on what type of birth you were able to have, vaginal births would go down the vagina, also called the birth canal, and out of the body. External genitalia is going to include the clitoris and the labia. There's going to be 2 labia and the clitoris in between those guys where they meet up. The clitoris for females is spongy tissue. When I talk about spongy tissue, I just mean that it can get engorged with blood, just like males' penises do. The clitoris does the same for females. So that's external genitalia for females. And then we talked about growing and developing baby. And then we have to feed baby because we are mammals. So that is definitely going to include mammary glands on females. Guys, body parts, they've got to produce the sperm. So they're going to produce sex cells, they're going to produce hormones. How do they do this? Well, sperm are going to be produced in the testes. And so we are going to have sperm produced in the testes, and then those little baby sperm are going to go to a place called the epididymis, where they are going to kind of mature, and they're going to grow their little tails, and then they'll hang out there. When it is go time for the sperm to leave the body and hopefully find an egg for the purposes of reproduction, it's going to go up the vas deferens. It's going to meet up with some seminal glands that are going to release secretions, and then it will leave the body via the urethra. The urethra is going to run through, for males, it's pretty long. When we talk about urinary tract infections, females' urethra is short. It's just a couple inches. But the male's urethra is pretty long because it's going to go from the bladder down through the prostate, through the membranous part where it's going to go through the, like the pelvic floor muscles down there. And then we've got the penile urethra right here. So the urethra is pretty long on guys. Therefore, they're less prone to urinary tract infections. So external genitalia is going to include penis, and then the scrotum that is going to house the testes. The testes have to be outside of the body on the males because it helps with lower body temperature. That cooler temperature helps produce healthier sperm. All right, moving on. Woohoo! Okay, that's it. We finished the sections of this part, and then we're going to talk about functions of human life in the next video.